all these people who went, all these people who want reparations, they've done no thinking about it. As soon as you start asking these people questions about history, you realize they have no fucking clue what they're talking about, and they never did any research in the issue. Right? He's talking about income disparities. What the fuck does income disparities have to do with reparations? So I come across this on the New York Times the other day, and this has got to be one of the worst, most misleading, and disingenuous articles on reparations I have ever read. And I am picking my words carefully and saying worst and misleading and not dumbest, because I can see throughout here what Douglas Murray is trying to do. He's trying to rephrase and reframe the argument of reparations, and also trying to bastardize the history to basically enrage a certain group of people. He's trying to race bait a certain group of people into being angry about an issue they know nothing about by lying to them and also completely going off. You'll see he brings up tons of stuff that has nothing to do with it, trying to make a group of people angry. Let me show you what I mean. So, let's start. Reparations aren't about justice. They're an act of revenge. So now we have to ask the first question. An act of revenge on who? When you pair it with the picture there, things are implied, right? He's trying to say something without saying it. And let's look at the caption. So, many who claim to support reparations for slavery say it will help foster racial harmony in a divided nation. Nobody said that. That's not what it's about. Anyway. But the unequal distribution of funds to one race would light a fire across the nation. Okay, so that's already really loaded. So already he's using a 160-year-old talking point from Andrew Johnson. And it's amazing to me that these talking points from the 1860s are still working today. He tried this very same thing. We're going, it's unfair that only a specific group of people are targeted for reparations. It would be unequal in law. Bitch, what were you doing for the past 200 and so years? Ignoring the fact that slave owners got reparations too, by the way, so he didn't have any complaints about that. Anyway, also, what does he mean here? What does Douglas Murray here mean by light a fire across the nation? Who is going to light that fire? Who is going to be angry about that? And what are they going to do about it? Do you see what he's trying to do here? He's trying to rile up the white ignorance into thinking that any talk of reparations is somehow us coming for white people. And he leaves out, of course, that reparations has nothing to do with white people. He leaves out it's about a debt that was never paid. He's doing this on purpose because he's trying to make them angry. Anyway, 10 years ago, the idea of reparations sat on the political fringes of America. That's actually not true, but okay. The question of whether or not compensation should have once been paid to former slaves has died out. Not least because the start of the 21st century, no one in America had actually suffered from slavery, but the country was a century and a half away from the bloody Civil War it fought over the issue. Okay, so now he's pulling out this argument of somehow the Civil War was the payment, which is one of the dumbest arguments I have ever seen. But here we go. He's already pulled out the next, the next go-to in the ignorance talking point on reparations. It was a long time ago. He's trying that one. But like I said, if you were to only learn the history from his article, you would think that was a valid argument. But when you actually look at the history, this argument doesn't hold up. Anyway, but there's a tendency in our age which does not allow wounds to mend or heal. Indeed, there is a movement that locates long-healed wounds in order to rip them open once again and then complain about the hurt it caused to themselves. So now he's trying to blame black people. That wound was never closed. Once a wound cuts, once it's deep enough, it can't heal on its own. You need to do something to help it heal. This is not a wound that just went away. You just never paid attention to it until recently when people started getting louder. Because this pain and suffering never went away. You just lived in a bubble. Anyway, in 2014, the writer Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote an essay in The Atlantic making the case for reparations. Recent times, few articles have made more of an impact. The issue of reparations began to be picked up by the radical left and made its way to the political center. You see what he's doing here now? Now he's trying to make it about left versus right, where he knows the ignorance on the right will never agree with anything on the left. So now he's trying to reframe this as this is just a radical left thing. Because remember, I've always said this about conservatives. They don't listen to black people. Only thing they do is respond to the left. The right always responds to the left. The left bastardized the reparations argument just as much. This is why you'll see MSNBC, CNN, and all of them will bring up these black faces who will start talking about reparations is about getting white people. And then the right responds to that as if that is us speaking, when that is not us speaking. Those are carefully vetted people who will make sure they say things that, like, largely white liberals want to hear. This is why I have good conservative values to the right until I start saying pro-black things. Then all of a sudden, I magically become a woke lefty. None of my positions have changed. It's just, if I don't go along exactly with a certain narrative, they'll consider you on the left. Because reparations is not a left versus right issue. It's not some redistributionist policy. The federal government took out a debt that they never paid. That's it. So anyway, by the time the Democratic primaries in 2020, all of the party candidates were willing to talk about the issue. Why is that even a problem for you? Okay. Some, including Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren, expressed support for some form of reparations, such as candidates pointed to the disparity between the average household wealth in white families and black families in America. Now he's trying to reframe the debate, and Kamala Harris laughed at the idea of helping black people. She was asked about reparations, and she laughed about it. So no, don't give me this, oh, Kamala was totally for it. No, she wasn't. She never was. Don't lie. Now he's trying to reframe the debate as disparity between white and black incomes. This has nothing at all to do with reparations. He's trying to completely reframe the debate as making it about some kind of socialist income equality nonsense. Moving on. Once the Democrats were in power, one of the first things they did in Congress was apply pressure on President Biden to set up a commission to study reparations for black Americans, both for slavery and systemic racism. A guilty verdict that was already in. See, this pissed me off about when the right did this. If you are so right, if you think you are so confident in your position that black people have no need for reparations for what was owed to black Americans after what happened to them, that the debt was never paid, you're so confident that's not needed, why are you trying to stop looking into it? Because if I'm right, and I'm like 100% confident I'm right, and you go, okay, I'm going to check you on it, I'm going to go ahead, look it up, I don't care. These people constantly kept bringing up nonsense about how it's some kind of socialist redistribution policy, or we don't need it, you know, that was a long time ago, etc., etc., etc. And then as soon as you go, we're going to look into the history, how about that? They're all like, no, don't do that. Why don't you want that? It just seems if you are correct, looking into it would only prove your point correct. So you know you're wrong. It certainly is true that disparities of wealth between black and white Americans, but disparities between black and white Americans and Asian Americans as well. This has nothing to do with anything, but I see what he's trying to do. In America in the 2020s, Asian Americans significantly outperformed every other racial group in their earnings. And what does this have to do about debt? Well, that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to make it a black versus white thing. That's why he said act of revenge. He's trying to rile up the white ignorance. All talk of reparations must confront this statistic. Why? What is the point? We don't have to confront that statistic because it's irrelevant to the conversation. This is like if we were talking about the American debt problem and I started shifting the conversation to about other countries' GDPs or some nonsense. All right, so if the cause of black economic underperformance in America in 2020 is systemic racism, why do other groups outperform them? Okay, so this is a straw man. So what he's trying to do here is say any form of systemic racism impact everybody except white people exactly the same. And it's not that black people economically underperform. We perform quite well. It's just that we were targeted over and over again by the federal government. Multiple Black Wall Streets has been destroyed. The Tulsa one that got destroyed in the riot, it was destroyed again after it was rebuilt by Nixon in 1970. They didn't target Asian communities this way. They didn't target Hispanic communities the same way the federal government targeted black communities. He's taking the left's logic of POCs. This is why I said I hate this word. I hate the word POC. Because the left uses it as a way to take a black issue and muddy it up to the point where it has no meaning. And so this is what he's doing. He's reframing this the way the left would frame it, making it about POCs. And why do groups that have arrived more recently outperform them? And why is the systemic racism of America not holding down Asian Americans if it's also pervasive? Because the feds didn't cover it. The feds didn't target Asians the same way they targeted black people. Those are completely different communities with completely different histories. But again, if you accept the left's framing of POCs, well, now this argument makes a lot more sense, right? But when you look at the nuance of it, it falls apart. Here we go. And then he puts as a caption, or as the caption for this picture, the debate over reparation is typically framed in terms of black versus white, which ignores the economic and demographic outcomes among other U.S. minority groups, such as Asians, who actually out-earn white people. It's not framed as black versus white. The left does that. You have the left-wing tap dancers that I said that the mainstream media on the left props up to say these things. This is why I remember a long time ago I did that video about the one BLM chick saying that looting was about reparations. And I was like, that person is just as damaging to this debate as the white ignite who doesn't know what they're talking about, trying to make it about welfare or something. The right now, the right-wing ignorance right now, they are so dumb, and I'm speaking to the right-wing ignorance. If you're not, this doesn't apply to you. They're so dumb, they can't even think in objective terms. They will always accept the left's framing on everything. And then they argue on the left's ground. That's what I mean. They don't talk to black people. They don't bring on black community members who are pro-reparations and actually talk to them to explain. No, they'll go, what did MSNBC say about it? That's the argument. What did some idiot like Antifa member say about it? That's the argument. Because that is an easy straw man to attack. But if you attack the actual history, now it's difficult. Okay. In recent years, the claim of systemic racism has become an all-encompassing explanation for everything the radical left wants done. Now he's making systemic racism a concept unique to the left. No, it is not. And the people who I can't stand these people on the left. It's like they work together. There's the people on the left and the right. The left will say everything is racist, and then if everything is racist, nothing is racist. And then the right will go along with that. Both sides don't want this to happen. It's just that the left is better at faking that they want it to happen, but they know what they're doing. The movement looks at complex problems and presents a simple answer. Racism because of white supremacy? This is literally what you are doing in reverse right now. You are taking a complex issue, and it's not even that complex. It's just about debt and labor. And you're trying to make it about anti-white racism. I can't stand these people, dude. They have no self-awareness of what they're doing. Okay, as I research these problems for my latest book, I am reading a trash-ass book. I did wonder whether there's anyone claiming to speak out about reparations that have done any real thinking about it. There are so many black politicians right now who are pro-reparations. You picked out, I highly, highly doubt you found smart individuals to argue these things. And he claims he researched the problem. In this article, there is not a single mention of the Emancipation Compensation Act of 1962. He doesn't want to bring that up. If he researched the issue, then I'm going to assume he's intentionally not bringing that up. And it's funny because All these people who want reparations, they've done no thinking about it. As soon as you start asking these people questions about history, you realize they have no fucking clue what they're talking about, and they never did any research in the issue. Right? He's talking about income disparities. What the fuck does income disparities have to do with reparations? For instance, today in America, we are no longer talking about a group of people who did a wrong paying compensation to the people whom the wrong was done. No, that's literally what we're talking about. We're talking about a group of people who look like a group of people who did a wrong in the past, making a vast wealth transfer to another group, people who look like to whom a wrong was done. See, this is what it's about. He admitted it. He thinks this is about get whitey. And no, it's not about what you look like, because reparations for slavery is an ADOS issue. It is not an African American issue or just a general blanket black issue. Caribbeans are not getting it. Nigerians are not getting it. But like I said, he's saying, I wonder if these people ever did any real research on the issue. But he's not even differentiating those two. And notice he's using the term wealth transfer to a group of people who didn't do anything wrong. So here's where he accidentally admitted he thinks this is about get white people. If the reparation were to be paid, where would they come from? Most of you would say the federal government. Okay, who pays the federal government? The American citizens do. So what the fuck does this have to do about taking money from white people? I'm pretty sure black people pay taxes. I'm pretty sure Hispanics pay taxes. I'm pretty sure Asians pay taxes. But this is what these fragile people are like. This is what they're like. They think everything is about us going after them. And this is why I remember what one guy told me. I remember he's like, when the reparations come, use whatever resources you have to buy a lot of guns. Because there are going to be ignorants like this who are going to light a fire under other ignorants' asses. So be ready and be armed. Which I absolutely agree with. I think there will be some extremely angry right-wing white ignorants who are going to be bold enough to engage in physical activity. So now, here we go. He's going to pull out this old talking point. He's going to pull out, well, the Africans sold the slaves to the Europeans. I love how they use that argument like it absolves the Europeans, right? It's like blaming the gun store owner because you bought a gun and then you used it illegally to murder somebody. And then trying to blame the gun store owner, well, they shouldn't have sold me the gun. So, moving on. And it's not just the unjustness of punishing people for wrongs done long before their time. Nobody's getting punished. But the madness that comes from even thinking such a task is performable. He pulled this one out in 1865. He was like, oh, this isn't feasible. There's no way we can afford this. Bitch, Lincoln said, okay, let's do it. He didn't have a problem. Lincoln was like, oh yeah, reparations, let's go. As soon as a certain person came in, magically overnight, it changed to, there's no way we can do this. Anyway, the transatlantic slave trade, like the far larger Arab slave trade from the same period, so here's what he's trying to do. He's trying to lessen the blame for what Europeans did. He's trying to trivialize it. He's trying to do a trick that a lot of ignorants try to do, is compare different slave trades and equate them all as slavery period is all equal. Which, when you look into the history, that wasn't exactly true. Anyway, was only made possible because black Africans kidnapped and sold their brothers and sisters into slavery. They were not kidnapped. Tribes would go to war, and the losing tribe would usually be enslaved. Now, the rules of African slavery were different than chattel slavery. And you go, well, why would the Africans sell to the Europeans then? Well, because of the lack of long-distance communication, the Africans didn't know the way the Europeans in America were running their slave trade. Because in other areas with slave trades, there were certain rules of what you could and couldn't do with slaves. They were not 100% property. Now, chattel slavery, which was 100% based on race, black people were 100% property. You could do whatever you wanted to them. And like I said, because of the lack of long distance communication, the Africans at the time didn't know this was going on. And this is not me justifying any kind of African slave trade. I'm just pointing out, stop trying to equate the two, like, or stop trying to make it like it absolves the Europeans from America at the time of what they did. How do we find who is responsible for all this? Oh, it's easy. The federal government. Okay, moving on. That was debunked quickly. How do we find out who among the black community in America is descended from American slaves and who is descended from African slavers? Well, and this is always funny for the people who go, you don't like it here, go back to Africa. Well, ADOS people cannot trace that. Not all ADOS people can trace their history. I personally could. I could find that out. But how about we just start with the people who can prove their ancestry, right? And we'll work from there. Does that sound okay? Let's try that. But see, so he knew, ignoring going back up, look, by saying this, he knew this wasn't about black versus white, and he's kind of hinting this was ADOS versus the federal government. So he knows the truth. He's just trying to obscure it to enrage and rile up white ignorance. And he's trying to act like, you know, his group is the one who's trying to ease racial relations. Anyway, what are we to do about people who have some of each inheritance in the family? Fuck, and? What does that have to do with anything? Anyway, anyone who thinks voter ID is intrusive will be amazed how much intrusion would be required to perform this act of mass DNA gathering. What the fuck does this have to do with voter ID? Black people who aren't against voter ID? The fuck? That was some leftist talking. Stop responding to them. They are not us. Some hope to arrive at equality by giving non-Western people a freer pass to carrying out the acts of vengeance on Western people. I don't know why he has that in quotes. I can guess why, but Arlington County's attorney, Parissa Yakhani, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that, recently said he plans to find a way to reduce the incarceration of black people by taking race into account in prosecutorial decision-making. And I don't care what some shit lib has to say. The former chief prosecutor condemned this, saying that it makes a mockery of blind justice and corrodes confidence in the justice system. Yeah, as we all know, America's court system is totally colorblind, and there are no numbers that totally disprove that. Especially when even taking into account factors like criminal history, age, and offense committed. Sure, no discrepancies. I always wonder why the right-wing ignorants never want to bring up the numbers when they make that claim. Very interesting. So others see this as a route to justice. What are you talking about, and what does this have to do with reparations? In 2020, San Francisco passed the Karen Act, which made it a hate crime to make a racially motivated 911 call against a black person without reasonable suspicion of a crime. Okay. And? The name comes from the derogatory term Karen, which in recent years has come to mean a white woman with entitled energy. And here we go with the white victimhood narrative. Karen is used against every woman and man who has a demeanor against a certain demeanor towards other people. Karen is not a derogatory slur for white women. The right reframed it as that. And the funniest part was, I remember in 2019, Pink News tried to make Karen into a racial slur against white women and play the victimhood card. And the right laughed at that concept and said they're just trying to be victims. 2 years later, 3 years later, now the right is like, yeah, it's a racial slur. Because the white victimhood narrative has been gaining traction. This is why they also want to say cracker is a racial slur. And it's not. It refers to a certain type of person, because most of them don't even know the origins of that word and think the term cracker refers to skin color. And it doesn't. It refers to the crack of the whip, of the slave master's whip. Anyway, the act makes it a potential crime to call the cops on the person who is black and makes white people doing so whether who the police take in for questioning. It is noteworthy in passing that the current era racial slurs are actually cool and can be written in law as long as the people they demean are white women. White victimhood narrative, bro. They're fragile. And then they're saying, and then he wants to turn and say, we're hurting ourselves. So, okay, here's where we get next level ignorant. Both of these actions in Arlington and San Francisco are explicit departures from the 14th Amendment's guarantee of equal protection of laws. Both take the form of explicitly an unequal treatment on the basis of race. Taking this further would certainly be one form of revenge, if not reparation. See, he thinks it's us trying to get white people. He has completely taken this off in some other direction, talking about some laws that some shitlibs passed. And now saying he thinks black people are trying to intentionally harm white people as our form of reparations. What the fuck are you talking about, dude? You wrote a fucking book on this? Dear Lord, God help the right. What is wrong with you people? But a grander, more common form of revenge is now what is taking place and sweeping across the culture. I come back to Coates' essay that kicked off this debate a decade ago. In his view, there was a precedent for American reparations in the money paid to Israel after the Holocaust by Germany, but this was a payment made immediately after a genocide, not 2 centuries after a barbaric trade. Well, whose fault was that? That sounds like a problem of the federal government for not paying their debt. That debt didn't go away. You don't make a promise like that and then poof, it disappeared because we waited long enough. And this doesn't help your argument. It just shows you're just proving part of the systemic racism argument, because it seemed like Asian people got reparations, Jews got reparations, fucking white people got reparations. Biden was proposing fucking alphabet reparations. With black people, it's always attacked and smeared, no matter what. All the things he said here, all this stuff was said to like Malcolm in the 60s. It just shows we have not moved as a country in terms of black people at all. It just simply, all the stuff that was going on just changed forms. So anyway, to finish off, the people who push for reparations in America today claim to be doing so in the name of racial harmony, but in fact, it's hard to imagine anything more likely to put a bomb under race relations in this country. Who is the one who is going to overreact and cause problems? It has just become another tool in the vengeance of the fevered anti-Western, anti-American spirit of our age? Anti-American? Isn't it the right saying Lincoln was the greatest president we've ever had? Lincoln was trying to get reparations. I always hate like when the right always goes like, well, Democrats were the party of slavery and the KKK and Jim Crow. Okay. And I say this because if you want to hold their past up against them and say this is who you are and still are, then Republicans should be the party of reparations. Otherwise, I don't know why you're bringing up the Democrats' past. Because you're not living up to your past. Dear Lord, these people are fucking trash.